You are not lost. You are simply walking without memory. There was a time when a man did not ask who he was. He trained until the answer lived in his bones. In the old world, before noise became identity, before comfort replaced strength, the warrior did not seek motivation. He followed a path. Bushido was never about the sword. It was an ancient system for governing fear, ego, and impulse, designed to turn chaos into clarity and men into presence. Today you feel restless, surrounded yet alone, moving constantly yet going nowhere. This is not weakness. It is disconnection. Modern psychology calls it fragmentation of self. The ancients called it loss of spirit. A young warrior once came to a mountain temple believing he needed more power, more certainty, more control. The master said nothing. Silence was the first lesson, because discipline is not loud. Strength does not announce itself, and mastery never begs for attention. This story is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering what was trained out of you. The path does not begin with confidence. It begins with obedience, to truth, to stillness, to presence. Tonight you will walk the warrior's path again, not as a soldier of violence, but as a guardian of your own spirit. Chapter 1. The man who mistook motion for direction. He rose before dawn as he always had. Body sharp, muscles obedient, breath controlled. By every visible measure, he was disciplined. Yet even as his feet touched the cold earth, a restlessness followed him like a second shadow. A quiet urgency, the need to move before thought could catch him. In the old villages, men like him were praised. Tireless, relentless, always training, always improving, always chasing the next edge. But the ancients knew a dangerous truth. Endless motion can be a form of fear. He trained harder when doubt appeared. He tightened his routine when anxiety whispered. He added weight, distance, repetition, not to grow stronger, but to outrun something unnamed inside his chest. Modern psychology has a word for this: compulsive striving. The nervous system locked in sympathetic overdrive. The mind mistaking effort for safety. The warrior did not know these terms. He only knew that stillness felt unbearable. When the sword cut the air, his thoughts quieted. When his lungs burned, his questions disappeared. Movement gave him relief, but relief is not resolution. At night, when the body finally collapsed, the mind returned. Questions sharpened in the dark. Why does victory feel temporary? Why does strength feel fragile? Why does silence feel like a threat? It was then he heard of the mountain monastery, a place beyond rank, beyond titles, beyond noise. They said warriors returned from there, different, not louder, not faster, but anchored, as if the ground itself moved with them. He told himself he went to advance his skill. But the truth was quieter. He was afraid of what would happen if he stopped. The ascent took 3 days. Each step upward stripped comfort away. The air thinned, the path narrowed. His body adapted easily. His mind resisted every meter. At the gate there were no guards, no banners, no challenge. Only wood worn, smooth by centuries of hands. He waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing happened. This unsettled him more than battle ever had. In combat, reaction is rewarded. Speed is survival. Here reaction was useless. When the monk finally appeared, he did not bow deeply. He did not ask the warrior's name. He did not acknowledge his weapons. He simply looked, not at the posture, not at the scars, at the space behind the eyes. "You move too much," the monk said calmly. The words struck harder than insult. The warrior stiffened. Movement is discipline. The monk turned and began walking away. Follow. No explanation, no lesson, no praise. The first ritual was humiliating in its simplicity. Stand. Breathe. Do nothing. Minutes stretched into eternity. The warrior's mind rebelled immediately. Thoughts raced, muscles twitched, ego searched for purpose. This is pointless. This is beneath me. This is a waste of time. His body wanted command, his mind wanted progress. But discipline, the monk later explained without looking at him, is not the ability to act. It is the ability not to act. Neuroscience confirms what the ancients practiced. When stimulus meets restraint, new neural pathways form. Impulse weakens, awareness strengthens. But awareness is uncomfortable. Because awareness reveals fear, and fear hates silence. As the sun lowered, the warrior realized something unsettling. Without movement, he did not feel strong. He felt exposed. The monastery was not testing his endurance. It was stripping away his escape, and for the first time in years, the warrior understood the truth he had been avoiding. His strength had no center. When motion ends, fear begins to speak, and silence becomes the battlefield. That night, sleep did not come easily. The warrior lay on a thin mat, staring into darkness that felt heavier than armor. The mountain was quiet, not the gentle quiet of rest, but the deliberate silence that exposes every internal sound. His breath was steady, his body was calm, his mind was not. Without the rhythm of training, thoughts surged unchecked, memories he had buried beneath discipline surfaced, failures reframed themselves, victories felt hollow. The question he had avoided for years finally found its voice. Who am I when I am not proving something? In the old way, warriors were taught that the mind follows the body, move correctly and the spirit will align, but that teaching was incomplete. Motion can shape discipline, but it can also hide disorder. Modern science echoes this ancient warning. When effort becomes compulsive, cortisol remains elevated. The nervous system never returns to baseline. The body adapts to stress, but the mind never integrates it. The warrior had mistaken tolerance for mastery. At dawn, the bell sounded low, resonant, impossible to ignore. He rose quickly, grateful for structure, eager for instruction. But again, there was none. Only repetition, standing, walking, breathing. Each movement was slow, deliberate, deprived of intensity. His frustration grew sharper with every hour. He wanted resistance, challenge, pain. Pain, he understood. Stillness mocked him. During a midday pause, he finally spoke. "What is the purpose of this?" The monk did not answer immediately. He placed a cup between them and filled it with water, slowly, carefully, until it overflowed onto the ground. "You came full," the monk said. "There is nowhere to add." The warrior clenched his jaw. "I came to refine my strength." The monk nodded once. "Strength without direction destroys its owner." That sentence lingered longer than any lecture. The warrior began to notice small things he had ignored his entire life. The way his breath shortened when he grew impatient. The way his shoulders tightened when he felt unseen. The way his mind leapt forward, always anticipating, never arriving. Presence, he realized, was not passive. It was demanding. Every moment asked something of him, not effort but honesty. When no one was watching, when there was nothing to win, his discipline weakened, not in action but in attention. His focus fractured, his thoughts wandered. His ego whispered excuses. This was the true measure. In ancient Bushido texts, discipline is described as obedience to reality, not to desire, not to fear, reality. Modern cognitive science would call this attentional control, the capacity to remain with what is, rather than flee into stimulation or projection. The warrior had trained his body to obey commands, but he had never trained his attention to obey truth. By the third day, something subtle shifted. He stopped counting time, not because he was calm, but because resistance exhausted itself. When the mind runs out of arguments, it grows quiet. And in that quiet, he felt it. A deep, unfamiliar tension, not in his muscles, but in his identity. If he was not striving, if he was not chasing, if he was not proving, what remained? That question unsettled him more than fear ever had. The monk observed him closely now, though he said little, watching not posture but pauses, not performance but restraint. "You believe discipline is movement," the monk said at sunset. "But movement is easy. Anyone can run from themselves." He turned toward the mountain path, disappearing into mist. The real path begins when you stop. For the first time, the warrior did not argue, because deep inside he knew everything he had called discipline had been preparation. But preparation without presence leads nowhere. And the monastery had only just begun removing what did not belong. When the body finally stops running, fear steps forward and demands to be seen. Chapter 2, Silence is where fear speaks. Silence did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, between breaths, between steps, between thoughts that no longer finished themselves. At first, the warrior believed he was becoming calmer. His body felt lighter, his movements softened, but calm was only the surface. Beneath it, something older began to stir. When distraction disappears, the mind does not become empty. It becomes honest. The monastery offered no refuge from this honesty. The wind moved through open corridors without apology. The bells rang without urgency. Time was no longer measured. It was endured. The master said nothing. That was the lesson. In modern neuroscience, silence removes external regulation. The brain, deprived of stimulation, turns inward. The default mode network activates memories, self-evaluation, unresolved fear. The ancients knew this without scanners or studies. They called it meeting the spirit. The warrior felt it during the longest watch of the day. He stood facing the valley, eyes open, sword absent, nothing to grip, nothing to guard. At first, boredom attacked him, then irritation, then restlessness. Finally, fear. Not the sharp fear of battle, not the adrenaline spike before impact. This fear was quieter, colder, more personal. Fear of being unnecessary, fear of being replaceable, fear that without struggle he had no worth. The body responded before the mind could explain. His breath shortened, his chest tightened, his jaw clenched as if bracing for a blow that never came. This was the fear that effort had kept hidden. The master's voice finally cut through the air, not loud, not comforting. Do not correct it. The warrior wanted instruction, technique, control. Instead, he was told to stay. In modern terms, this was exposure without escape, the nervous system forced to remain present with discomfort until it rewired itself. No avoidance, no suppression. Ancient warriors trained this deliberately. They understood that fear loses authority when it is observed without reaction. But ego cannot survive observation. As minutes stretched, the warrior noticed something unsettling. Fear demanded response. It wanted justification. It wanted action. And when none came, it weakened. Not gone, but smaller, like a voice losing confidence. He realized then, fear had ruled him not because it was powerful, but because it had always been obeyed. Silence removed its rank. The master later explained briefly, without drama. Fear is information, he said. Ego turns it into command. The sword remained sheathed for a reason. Combat externalizes conflict. Silence internalizes it. That night, the warrior dreamed differently. No enemies, no victories, only himself, standing still while waves moved past him without pulling him under. When he woke, his body felt heavy, but his mind felt clearer. The collapse had begun. Not of strength, but of false identity. He was no longer fighting fear. He was learning to outlast it. When fear no longer commands you, discipline steps forward to replace it. The days that followed did not grow easier. They grew clearer. The warrior noticed that fear returned in cycles, not as an enemy advancing, but as a tide. It rose without warning, peaked without explanation, and fell only when he stopped resisting it. This unsettled him. In battle, patterns can be studied. An opponent reveals habits. Fear did not. It arrived disguised as logic. You are falling behind. You are wasting time. You are losing your edge. The voice sounded reasonable, protective even. Modern psychology calls this the survival mind, threat detection systems misfiring in safe environments. The brain, conditioned by years of urgency, interprets stillness as danger. The ancients recognized this pattern instantly. They called it the unruly horse. A horse does not need to be beaten into obedience. It must be guided until it trusts the rider. The mistake is force. Force creates resistance. Presence creates alignment. The master tested him quietly. One evening, as the warrior stood watch, the master approached and placed the sword within arm's reach, close enough to grasp, close enough to feel its promise. Nothing was said. The test was not temptation. It was identity. The warrior felt the familiar pull, the certainty, the clarity that weapons provided. With a blade in hand, the world simplified. problems became solvable. But this time he did not move. He watched the urge rise, the tightening in his forearm, the mental justification forming. And then, nothing happened. The urge passed. That moment rewired something fundamental. Neuroscience confirms it. When impulse is noticed and not acted upon, the prefrontal cortex strengthens its regulatory control. What was once reflex becomes choice. The warrior understood it differently. He had discovered a new kind of strength. Not explosive, not impressive, but unshakable. Later, the master finally spoke more than a sentence. "You believed fear was your weakness," he said. "It was never the problem. Your obedience to it was." The warrior bowed, not in submission, but recognition. The ego resisted one last time. "If I do not push myself, I will become soft. If I am not aggressive, I will be surpassed." The master responded with a story. Water that rushes breaks itself against stone. Water that waits shapes the mountain. Silence followed. That night, the warrior realized something profound. Ego does not disappear all at once. It dissolves when it is no longer needed. Ego had protected him once. It had driven survival, achievement, endurance, but it had outlived its purpose. And like all outdated tools, it became dangerous. The monastery was not erasing him. It was updating him. As days passed, his posture changed, not by instruction, but by release. His gaze softened. His movements slowed without losing precision. Presence replaced tension. The master observed one final moment before moving on. A sudden sound echoed from the forest, a branch snapping sharply. The warrior turned, alert but calm, breath steady, no rush, no contraction. The master nodded once. Fear had spoken, and for the first time it had not been obeyed. The sword remained untouched, because the real weapon had been forged elsewhere. When fear loses its authority, discipline must replace it, or chaos returns. Chapter 3, Discipline Before Freedom. The mentor spoke on the seventh morning, not with ceremony, not with encouragement. Correction does not announce itself. The warrior had just finished the morning walk, 30 measured steps across gravel, turn 30 back, slow enough to feel every shift of weight, precise enough to expose every lapse of attention. "You still believe discipline is effort," the mentor said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "It is not." The warrior remained still, listening. Effort exhausts, discipline preserves. That single sentence reframed everything the warrior thought he knew. In the world he came from, discipline meant intensity, pain endured, willpower forced forward, motivation summoned like a weapon. But willpower is fragile. Modern psychology is clear on this. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes under stress. It collapses under emotion. Systems that rely on motivation eventually fail. The ancients understood this intuitively. They did not build warriors on motivation. They built structures. Discipline, the mentor explained, is not a feeling. It is an environment designed so the correct action becomes inevitable. The warrior was assigned new practices, not harder ones, smaller ones. He bowed before entering every space. He walked only when instructed. He ate only when the bell sounded. He waited, often without explanation. Waiting was the hardest. Waiting stripped him of autonomy. And autonomy, he realized, had been the ego's favorite illusion. The modern world worships freedom as absence of constraint. But absence of constraint creates chaos. Bushido taught the opposite. Freedom is what remains after impulse is governed. Psychology calls this self-regulation, the capacity to align behavior with long-term values rather than short-term emotion. The warrior felt resistance rise again. Subtler this time, more refined. "Why must I bow so often? Why so much repetition? Why no explanation?" The mentor answered once, then never again. Form carries wisdom when the mind refuses to listen. Repetition did something unexpected. Without novelty, the warrior's mind lost its appetite for commentary. There was nothing to optimize, nothing to impress, nothing to prove. Each action became an anchor. Walking became walking. Breathing became breathing. Bowing became acknowledgement, not of authority, but of reality. Neuroscience confirms this ancient method. Repetitive ritual stabilizes the nervous system, reduces cognitive noise, and strengthens attentional control. The brain stops searching. It starts inhabiting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warrior changed. His reactions softened before they reached the surface. His breath settled lower in the body. His awareness widened without effort. He no longer asked when training would progress. Progress had become irrelevant. This unsettled him at first. Without measurement, ego starves, and starved ego weakens. One evening, as rain fell steadily against stone, the warrior realized he had not thought about his future all day. No ambition, no anxiety, no calculation, only presence. This was not peace, it was alignment. The mentor observed him closely now, not as a student, but as material. "You're beginning to understand," he said quietly. "Discipline is not restriction, it is protection. Protection from impulse, protection from fear, protection from the self that reacts before it understands." The warrior bowed, this time without thought, not because he was told to, because it was correct. When discipline becomes internal, the path no longer needs instruction. It reveals choice. Structure began to replace struggle, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of something settling into its proper place. The warrior noticed it first in moments that once triggered him. A delayed meal, a sudden change of routine, a correction delivered without warmth. Where irritation once rose immediately, there was now a pause. In that pause lived choice. Modern neuroscience calls this response inhibition, the space between stimulus and action where mastery resides. The ancients never needed the term. They trained it directly. Bushido did not ask a warrior to feel calm. It demanded he behave correctly before calm arrived. The mentor intensified the structure. Days were divided into segments so precise they felt merciless. Wake, clean, walk, sit, eat, train, sleep. No variation, no negotiation. The warrior felt something unexpected, relief. When decision is removed, attention returns. The mind, no longer tasked with preference, became sharp, clear, efficient. Ego resists discipline because discipline removes its authority. There was no room for self-pity here, no stage for self-importance, no applause, only correctness. The mentor explained it once without emphasis. Chaos is expensive, structure is efficient. The warrior began to understand the deeper design. Discipline was not about obedience to the mentor. It was obedience to reality as it is, unromantic, repetitive, uncompromising. And in that obedience, something profound emerged. Time slowed, not externally, but internally. Moments expanded. Sensations sharpened. He felt the ground through his feet, the air through his lungs, the weight of silence resting on his shoulders, not as burden, but as responsibility. Psychology would describe this as flow, stabilized by ritual, the mind fully engaged without self-reference. The ancients called it presence. One afternoon, the mentor interrupted a practice without warning. "Why do you bow?" he asked. The warrior did not answer immediately. Earlier, he would have reached for explanation, symbolism, philosophy. Now he waited. "Because it aligns me," he said finally. "Not with you, with the moment." The mentor's eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment, in confirmation. "You no longer need explanation," he said. "That is good." Discipline had done its work, not by forcing transformation, but by removing distraction until truth became unavoidable. The warrior no longer trained to become something. He trained to remain accurate, accurate in posture, accurate in breath, accurate in response. Accuracy replaced intensity. This was the invisible transformation. No one would notice it from a distance, but nothing escaped it up close. The mentor offered one final correction before withdrawing. "Freedom is not the absence of form," he said. "It is the ability to move correctly within it." The warrior understood now why the strongest structures are often unseen, why the most disciplined men appear calm, why the most dangerous warriors rarely hurry. Discipline had crossed an internal threshold. It was no longer enforced. It was embodied. And when discipline becomes internal, something changes fundamentally. The path no longer feels imposed. It feels revealed. For the first time since arriving, the warrior sensed what lay ahead. Not another lesson, not another ritual. A test, not of strength, of choice. When discipline is no longer imposed, the warrior must choose who he is without instruction. Chapter 4. The path does not end. It reveals. The test did not announce itself. There was no bell, no formal summons, no warning that the moment had arrived. That was intentional, because real tests never arrive prepared. The warrior sensed the change before he understood it. The monastery felt empty, not abandoned but unobserved. The mentor was absent. The routines remained, but the pressure behind them had lifted. Structure without supervision. This is where most men fail. Psychology confirms it. Behavior maintained only by external control collapses when that control is removed. True self-regulation appears only when no one is watching. Bushido was designed precisely for this moment. That morning, a visitor arrived at the outer path. Loud footsteps, heavy breathing, a man carrying the weight of impatience in his posture. He demanded water, then answers, then recognition. The warrior felt the old reflex stir. Correct him. Assert order. Demonstrate authority. Ego whispered, "You have earned this place." But discipline intervened, not as force, as clarity. He served water without explanation. He listened without interruption. He offered no justification, no correction. Presence disarmed what dominance would have escalated. The visitor scoffed and left, muttering about weakness. The warrior did not follow him with his eyes. That was the test. Strength is not the need to be understood. Later that day, the mentor returned, briefly. "You were observed," he said. The warrior bowed, not deeply, not submissively. Accurately, the mentor walked with him along the edge of the valley. Mist drifted below them, obscuring the path downward. "This is where men misunderstand the way," the mentor said. "They believe mastery ends conflict." The warrior waited. "Mastery ends compulsion," the mentor continued. "Conflict still comes." Modern psychology would call this emotional differentiation, the ability to remain oneself in the presence of pressure. The ancients called it integrity of spirit. The warrior felt it now. He was no longer pulled outward by insult, no longer driven inward by fear, no longer defined by reaction, not numb. Integrated, the mentor stopped. "You came here believing you needed more," he said. "More strength, more certainty, more control." The warrior said nothing. "You leave knowing you need less. Less noise, less urgency, less ego." The master placed the sword at his feet. "Take it," he said. This time, the warrior did. Not eagerly, not reverently, responsibly. The weight felt different now, familiar but honest. No promise of identity, only function. Neuroscience would say his relationship to threat had changed. The amygdala no longer commanded. The prefrontal cortex led. The ancients would say something simpler. The spirit had found its seat. As dusk settled, the mentor spoke one final time. "The path does not end here," he said. "It begins everywhere else." The warrior looked down the mountain road. It was the same road he had climbed, but he was not the same man. When the path is internalized, every step becomes a test, and every moment a choice. The descent was quieter than the ascent, not because the world had changed, but because the warrior no longer collided with it. Each step down the mountain tested nothing new. Hunger returned, fatigue followed, uncertainty waited at every bend. The difference was not in the conditions, it was in the relationship. Before, discomfort had demanded response. Now it offered information. This is the final integration. Modern science calls it coherence. When cognition, emotion, and physiology align under stress, the ancients described it as walking in accordance with the way. The warrior passed through villages that once would have stirred his ego. He was recognized by some, ignored by others, challenged by a few. None of it moved him, not because he had become indifferent, but because he had become accurate. When insult came, he noted it and passed on. When temptation appeared, he observed it and declined. When fear arose, he listened without kneeling. The sword remained present but secondary, a tool, not a crutch. He no longer needed to prove restraint. Restraint had become reflex. This is where most teachings end, but Bushido does not. Because mastery is not withdrawal from the world. It is engagement without distortion. The warrior returned to ordinary life, where no bells signaled practice and no mentors corrected posture. The ancient system was now internal. Discipline governed his mornings, presence shaped his speech, silence tempered his decisions. No one applauded this. That was the point. Psychology confirms a final truth. Sustainable transformation is quiet. The nervous system stabilizes. The identity consolidates. There is no peak, only consistency. The warrior felt it most clearly in moments of choice. A confrontation that could escalate did not. An opportunity that fed ego was refused. A responsibility that demanded courage was accepted without drama. This was transcendence without spectacle, not above life. Within it, he understood now why the master had spoken so little. Truth does not require persuasion once it is embodied. The path revealed itself in ordinary moments, in how he stood when waiting, how he breathed when pressured, how he acted when no one was watching. Bushido had not made him invulnerable. It had made him governed by discipline instead of fear, by presence instead of impulse, by mastery instead of ego. And that is the ancient promise modern men forget. You are not meant to feel powerful. You are meant to be precise. The warrior did not claim the title. He lived the function, and in doing so, he discovered what the path was always pointing toward, not a destination, not an identity, not a philosophy, but a way of standing in the world without being owned by it. You are not lost. You have only forgotten that discipline, silence, and presence are the ancient path back to yourself.